Hi, Al.
Hey, Jim.
So I have a question for you. When did you develop an interest in recording?
Um, my first interest in recording was when I was 8 years old. Do you want me to elaborate on that?
Please.
My uncle had a recording studio in New York City called Harry Schmitt Recording at 2 West 46th Street. And I would get on the subway from Brooklyn, go over to his place on Saturday and spend the weekend with him. And we'd spend all day Saturday at the studio, and he'd be recording or doing whatever. And then I would stay overnight with him and then come back home to my house on Sunday. He was my father's brother, so he was my uncle, and he was also my godfather. And he didn't have any children, so I was kind of like his son. And I would go over there and just see all these amazing people, from Art Tatum to Bing Crosby to the Andrew sisters, to Kate Smith to Orson Welles, you name it. They were all there, and Les Paul was his best friend, so I saw Uncle Les almost every weekend. And he would have me clean patch cords. They had the big patch cords in those days. I would clean the patch cords and set up chairs and watch him record. So I was always interested in it. He always had a big wad of money. He was doing really well. He had a convertible, brand new convertible car. He had an apartment on Riverside Drive, overlooking the river. He was very wealthy, and we were very poor. So, I wanted to be just like him.
What was your last job you had before you got into recording?
I was a cryptonologist in the Navy.
You were stationed in Washington?
Washington, D.C. at the Naval Observatory was where we worked, and our barracks were on the Potomac River.
Hi, everybody. It is Monday once again, and tonight I do not have one guest. I have many, many guests, but we're all here because of an absent guest. As I'm sure you know, a week ago we lost Al Schmitt, who is even saying that he's the Washington on the Mount Rushmore of engineers is an understatement. And on top of that, he was a really special friend to a lot of us and a mentor in so many ways. And so I'm honored to actually be hosting this evening of remembrance and celebration of Al. And I think the biggest thing for tonight is that we're here to remember all the joy that he brought us, not the sadness at losing him. And so I think that's what tonight is all about. I'm going to be very awkwardly running OBS and Zoom while we do stuff. But the first thing I want to mention is that for anyone who knew Al, you know that one of his passions was animals. He loved animals and he loved saving animals. So first of all, if you want to do something in memory of Al, go to any animal shelter, adopt as many animals as will fit in your car, and name them all Al. If you can't do that, then there are two charities that his wife Lisa has pointed out that you could donate to in Al's name or in your own name. It doesn't really matter, but giving them money will help. So the first one is the Wildlife Trusts, and I'm putting a link on the screen for you. And that's going to run for about 20 seconds. And I don't really know much about them other than that they help animals. So you should definitely donate to that. And you can do that probably on your phone on the way to the animal shelter. And now we'll take that one off the screen. And the other one is called the Friends of Milo Foundation. These both benefit animals, and absolutely one of Al's passions, other than making records, which is obviously how most of us know him. And we've got a lot of people here basically just to tell stories. But there is one thing at the very end. We were hoping to have some music, but because we're streaming on all of the social media platforms, playing copyrighted music will immediately get your video taken down. So over the next hour or so, while we're telling stories, if you could go and find on any audio service, or if you've got the CD or the vinyl or the cylinder, whatever it is, of Unforgettable, the Nat King Cole, if you could cue that up, we'll let you know when to play it. So, enough of that. What we'd like to start with is there is a group called the METAlliance, which I was a founding member of, and it is a group of incredibly good friends, but also audio professionals. And I'm going to read you their mission statement and then show you a short video. So the METAlliance is a strategic union of music producers and engineers dedicated to the highest standards of audio and delivery of music, securing the art through recording technology in all its evolving modern forms. And I'd like to show you a little video right now of some of their very important work.
One of the hints, or one of the things I suggest to guys, especially guys recording at home, is to save their money and buy the best microphones they can buy. And rather than buy a couple cheap mics, save up and buy a really good mic. And the better your mics are, the better your stuff is going to sound.
Yeah. You know, I've heard that said about furniture. Instead of buying a bunch of cheap furniture,
It's true.
buy something that's, you know, that's really good, that costs a little more, and
I'll tell you, I know about
in the
that.
long run, you're going to be happier.
I just had
too.
air conditioning and heating redone in my house. $12,000.
Can we do one?
I would think plumbing too.
And I have a
is-
roof. I had a roof done too.
Let's do one cut in. Ed, can you just ask Al the question about the classical guitar, like how would he approach Mike on a classical guitar? I just kind of need
Sure.
that to get that started.
Al,
Yes, dear.
what are you doing later?
I'm going home with you.
Nah. So Al,
Yes,
you know,
dear.
these things just don't happen, you know.
Yeah. Ed, why don't you ask me how I record a guitar,
Classic,
a classical guitar?
So Al, what would you do to record a classical guitar?
I explained that before, right? I don't have
You
to
got
go to
it.
it
That's
again.
all I just
Well,
said.
let's see if we get the same answer this time.
I couldn't remember what I said before, so
Just making crap up. That's good.
I'll record a gassical guitar. Well, it was a gassical guitarist, and we put him in an ISO booth.
Did you give the answer? How do you record? You just say, Dean, is the mic in the right spot?
that's what,
You don't even say. Here.
we talked about that.
Yeah, it's there.
Yeah, put the mic out there and then Dean just puts it where he wants, and that's it.
Yeah.
As a friend, he would do, but he'd do anything to help most friends. He was always concerned about what he did and how it would carry on later. Al was always willing to teach younger engineers starting out what was important. He'd do clinics at colleges and never asked to be paid for his knowledge.
Hey, Andrew, I think we're missing sound.
He just loved doing that. Over the years, I started to realize the relationships he had with the artists he worked with. You never know, you never hear an artist speak about Al with anything but love. He considered himself a friend to all of his artists and their music. His life was about going into the studio every day. He was so dedicated to everything he did. Everyone speaking today has funny stories they'd like to tell you. I do too. I did a lot of work with Al on Steely Dan. And one day he was in the studio mixing Steely, and he got him way earlier than when they did. And he had everything up. He was listening. He'd pretty much done the mix, and he just needed to play it for him. So at some point, and I don't know what the reason was, but he turned off the monitors, and Donald and Walter and Gary walked in. They didn't see anything, or Al didn't see them, and they looked around and thought, well, they saw the tape running, they saw the meters were working, and they assumed that Al was mixing without monitors. And he went on about his business. They walked out. And at some point they came back in and they said, Al, what's going on? Do you have a mix for us? Can you play it for us? And he says, yeah, I'm pretty much done. And I'll play it for you. And he starts to play music. They didn't have much to do. They were a few things, and it was over. That night, I get a call from Donald, Walter, and Gary, and they said to me, hey, can you mix without monitors? I said, no, you can't mix without monitors. And he said, well, Al did our mix without monitors. I said, well, that can't be. It just can't be. And I'm telling you, he was looking at the meters and it all sounded perfect. I said, well, okay, I believe you guys. I'm going to call Al. So I call Al. I said, what were you doing today? And he said, well, I was mixing the cut. And I said, were you doing it without monitors? And he said, no, do it without monitors. No. So I said, well, Donald, Walter, and Gary walked in. They heard nothing. And they saw you looking at the meters. And they thought you were doing a mix based on what the meters were doing. And he said, that's stupid. But let's just leave it like that. Don't say anything. Let's let them and everyone else know I don't use monitors. So that became a story that we told for years. I could talk about my dear friend Al forever, but there are other people who need to talk as well. And I do want to mention that for everybody who's been putting posts on Al's Facebook page, that his wife, Lisa, is totally taken away by it. She loves reading these. At the end of the day, it's like meeting new friends for her. And she's finding out stories that happened between Al and whoever wrote it. And please continue to do that. Now I'd like to introduce Niko Bolas.
Hi, thanks, Els. This is not a Zoom meeting I ever wanted to be on. First of all, thank you for clarifying that, because for the last 40 something years, I thought Al mixed without monitors. So it's good that you actually got the truth out there so I can stop feeling guilty about needing speakers. Al's the reason I'm still making records. One really quick story that I can share with you about the kind of person he was. I went through a lot in my life, and I've known Al for 41 years, I think, 42 years. And I assisted him in 1980 or something like that, 70, when we first opened Record One. So I decided to get into solar power. I figured, you know, I'm not really working a lot. I want to do something different. And I stopped by to have lunch with Al, and he just told me, don't be ridiculous. You're going to be the house mixer at Capitol. Paola wants you to lease a space upstairs, and you're going to do it. And that's all there is to it. I don't even want to talk to you about it. And that was 12, 15 years ago. Now I'm still making records, and it's still his fault. We worked together a lot. And it never ceased to amaze me how simple everything seemed to be when you were working with Al. Genewick and I were doing a record with Robert Cray, and Steve Genewick, who you'll probably hear from later and everybody must know, worked with Al forever and taught me a lot of what I learned from Al. He would explain what the hell was going on. And we were doing this record with Robert Cray, and Al walks in, we had everything up, set up the mics, everything sounds good, everybody's playing. Al walks in, sits down, and it just gets better. And and Steve comes over and he goes, Niko, he goes, you and I can set these mics up every day, all day long, exactly in the same place. And it just never sounds as good as when he sits down, and I don't know why. And I sat there and I looked at him, I said, I don't either. And I've been watching him for 40 years. So I'd like to settle one rumor and tell you that I'm pretty sure it's got to be true. It was reputed that Al decked David Hassinger on the loading dock at RCA. Because David Hassinger, anybody that's worked for Al knows if you're on time, you're late. That's all there is to it. You get there early. And Hassinger showed up late for a session. Hassinger was assisting Al at the time. So Al didn't say anything. Supposedly the session went down. Al had set everything up himself. Hassinger shows up. They do the session. He says, can you come outside for a second? He takes him out to the loading dock. Bam! Knocks him down on the loading dock. And I always thought, that's got, he's from New York and it's a tough guy and it's all that. Really? And Al just would kind of go, yeah, and he would slough it off. So a couple of years ago, we go to Richie Sambora's house out in Calabasas for Easter. And Richie's given us this tour, this beautiful palatial rock star house. And he says, up there's the gym I built. I got a little boxing thing in there. Come on, I'll show you, Al. He brings Al up there. And he's got this great big heavy bag hanging by chains from the ceiling. And he comes up and he starts hitting it. And he turns around and he goes, this is pretty cool. I got my boxing training in here. Al walks up and he goes, yeah? He walks up to the bag. And all of a sudden he just kind of shrunk down and rabbit punched it 4 times as fast as you can imagine. And it was so hard that the bag jumped up and didn't come down until the 4th punch and then slammed down on the chains. And I looked at the thing and I looked at Richie, and Richie's eyes were about this big, and I looked at Al. Al turns around and he goes, yeah, it's not bad. And he walked out. And that's when I realized he really was a Golden Gloves in the Navy, and he probably really did knock Hassinger out, and I never want to be late for one of his sessions. It's a true story. On the lighter side of stuff, Al shared, we were both in a 12-step program together. I had a lot of problems coming up. A lot of people do. And Al was one of the guys that helped me, and we shared sobriety together for 33 years. And that's important because it has nothing to do with music. And if you were friends with Al, your friendship may have started in the studio, and it may center around the family we call studio. But your friendship was one on a soul level. And if you were one of us that was lucky enough to know that, then you are a blessed human being. That's really all I have to share.
Cool.
Awesome, Niko. I love that story.
That's a great story. That's a great story. So, okay, a couple of years ago, Al and I were invited by Daniel Detweiler to do a seminar together in Basel, Switzerland. We were there to do the usual Q&As, and each of us would do a jazz band recording. Now, having said that, there's no one I've ever met who isn't in awe of Al, and musicians especially. It's a combination of awe and intimidation, but nobody doesn't know Al. So we're invited to the studio in Basel, and Al gets the nice recording studio and control room. Genewick was there to make sure Al's setup is right. I'm invited to build a recording studio from scratch in a medium-sized auditorium, a challenge I ordinarily appreciate. Not this time. The auditorium is, well, an auditorium. By itself, it doesn't have good ambience, and there's no hope for usable leakage. Eventually grab a few gobos and set up what I can find, mics and a fresh Pro Tools system from scratch. And we're missing some essentials like a monitor system, like a dependable monitor system, but get it set up, cats come in, and I introduce myself to 4 really dubious musicians. And we struggle through recording a couple tunes as best we can. The next day, Al and I each demonstrate our mixes and talk about how we mix. Well, Al is bringing up tracks in a mix, and you know how he does those tiny little level adjustments, and he's talking or telling a story or listening to a story, and everything sounded great. And later it's me, Al leaves. Later it's me, I start bringing up my mix. Track by track, I know I'm in trouble, and I'm scrambling to fix things. I did the best I could to stand the mix up, but no matter what I did, it wasn't convincing, especially musicians who were back and this kind of thing. and in my defense, their performance was a bit labored and nothing really gelled. Sounded like shit. Next, Al is to join me to do a joint presentation after a break, and nowhere to be found. And I'm looking around, and I found him here snoozing. and so I wake him up, go back in the auditorium, and I'm playing the mix again. And he's just shaking his head and says, "Can I make a suggestion? George, nobody records a double bass in stereo. Make it mono." You know, and all heads turn to Al and dutifully do it. I play it, and everybody's nodding. And it was agreed by everybody that it sounded much better. And that was the magic of Al. We all stand on the shoulders of giants. Phil and Ed and Al. And I feel like they were ripped off from underneath me. And now it's my turn to learn how to be sincere and learn how to be an engineer. And I'm reminded of that every time I sit down to work. Boy, I miss him. Chuck, you say something.
Well, you sure know how to leave it with a tear there, George. Yeah, dang. Well, you know, I probably knew Al the shortest time of all of you guys, which still is like well over 25 years. So I'm not exactly sure how I first met Al. I'm certain it was hanging out with all of you guys and Ed and Phil at an AES convention, and Al would have been there, and I would have probably been on my knees like going, Al Schmitt, I got to meet Al Schmitt just now. I mean, seriously, I always loved music as a little kid, and was fortunate to grow up during the Beatles era. But I don't really, I'm certain the first name when it came to engineering that I realized, okay, there's something that the guy behind the console does that is magic, because these records sound better than everybody else's. And that guy was Al. I mean, he probably is really the reason that I decided that, you know, there was something to pursue in being an engineer, and that there was a craft and something worth doing. So that was Al. And And at any rate, I feel like, you know, because of Al, I had to be better than I had been. And it really was, well, and all of you guys too, but Al really, he pushed the bar so far. You know, I know that we're really not meant to talk about it, but we've all served on crafts committee for the Recording Academy and in nominating best engineered recordings. And you know, you'd listen to all these recordings and you'd kind of debate about whether they were worthy to be nominated. And then up would come a Al Schmitt recording and you just go, damn it, he did it again. You know, it was just, his recordings were just that great. They just stood out above everything else. And like you said, George, and Niko, you hinted at it too. I mean, I was doing a session at Capitol and Studio C. I was mixing a Trisha Yearwood record, and Vince Gill was doing a Christmas album in A, and they had both A and B, the full orc thing going on. I mean, a gazillion musicians in there, and Steve Genewick had set up the session as he had done hundreds of times for Al. And I got to walk around the room as Al kind of like, you know, talked to the guys and he'd kind of slightly move the bass mic, or he'd, you know, just real minor adjustments. And we walked into the control room and Tony Brown was producing and Vince was there. You could tell Vince was just nervous as hell, you know, to be having to sing live with an orchestra. And Al, man, he stood in the back of the room with Tony and Vince and told stories and made Vince feel like, you know, at ease. I mean, he just had a way of doing that. His stories, he was the best storyteller. We got to hear a lot of his stories. A lot of them won't get shared, but amazing stories. And at any rate, so Vince kind of sneaks off to the vocal booth and they start running down the session. At this point, Steve's still behind the controls, kind of dialing things in, and it sounded really good. I mean, full orchestra and everything. But Al sits down, and I mean, I swear, it literally looked like he just waved his hands across the console. And all of a sudden, it sounded amazing. And it's just, he had a way of doing that. It's just the depth and dimension, his heart that he put into the music. It's just won't ever be repeated. That's all I got to say. Frank?
Hey, thanks, Chuck. I guess as you, I didn't really know Al until we started the METAlliance. I mean, I knew of Al, but you know, when I first started out back in the 80s, there were a few names that you became aware of. Al was one, Jeff Emmerich was one, George was one, Eliott and all of you guys. But I always felt like I was going to do a good job at what I did, but I would never be friends or be part of a group like that. And when I first met Al and the rest of you for the METAlliance, I was kind of stunned that I was accepted into the group, but it was kind of like in my years before engineering, I was a singer-songwriter, and I was always trying to, as a songwriter, get songs to Linda Ronstadt or Peter Asher or someone like that. And as I started engineering after 9 years of no success as a singer-songwriter, I was suddenly working with Peter Asher and folks like that. Well, I felt the same way when I met Al and the METAlliance and realized that I was talking with giants and talking with people who were the epitome of and the apex of what we do. And I couldn't I still have never come totally to terms with that I was accepted by the group, but I must say that what Al brought to the table in terms of engineering is beyond just simple great records. I learned so much from him in the 25 years that I've known him. But the most important thing was that Al seemed to epitomize the passion, but also the inbred kind of recognition of what it is to be a real engineer, a real producer, a real musician, not someone that just had the technology under his grasp, because that's one of the skill sets, is the technology. But beyond the technology, there's also the art. And the art is not so easy to grasp. And Al embodied that art in a way that no one else did. He had a way of understanding the artistry along with the technology. The third aspect of the engineering and production ideal that I always strived for is something that's not talked about much, but it's the psychology of being an engineer, of being a producer. I don't think that artists work with an engineer or producer over and over and over again unless there's something other than great sound. And what that is the ability to put an artist at ease, to put something into the artist's mind that aspect is all taken care of. It's done. Al is sitting at the console, and so they no longer have to do anything other than focus on their performance. And Al would then draw that performance out of them. If you listen to his records, it's not just about great sound, and it is great sound, but more so, it's having that ability to draw the best out of the artist. And when the artist goes back and listens to the recording that they've done, they say, you know, that's the best performance I've ever done. And I think that I got to work with this guy again because he's going to help me to be the best artist that I can be. And the ability to run a session is so much more than that technology and art. It's the ability that when the artist or the musician walks in the room, you know he's got your back. You know that he is going to do the absolute best that can be done for you. And that allows everyone to focus only on one thing, and that's their performance. And that was part of the magic of Al that went way beyond just the fact that he was a great mixer. I think that that when you take this up and you take the idea of being in the engineering profession, you look to people like Al and you look to those who go beyond the simple day-to-day. And I think for me, I have learned so much. You know, in all these stories you hear, Al always got there early. I didn't do that when I first started out because I didn't understand the importance of that. But if you read Al's book and you read the things that Al has said over the years, part of what you come to grips with is he was going to make sure that when the downbeat happened, he was ready to record magic. Now, nowadays, so many times people get used to being lazy and they won't record the first take or the second take. They're worrying getting sounds and drawing things up. Al was ready from the downbeat to get the magic. And if the magic was that first take, and you'll hear the story Al always tells about Breezin' with George Benson, where they just went in, downbeat comes in, they do Broadway and some of the other takes that were just magic, put the album out, and about 90% of it was first takes. And so many people today don't understand that. But Al intrinsically understood what it is to be a musician, what it is to be part of that passion, that music, and getting that emotion to people. And I always have said that when people ask me what I do, I say I record emotion. There's no one that recorded emotion better than Al Schmitt. And for me, he was just that kind of guy. And you felt it the first time you talked with him. And to this day, I will never forget all he taught me and all he meant to me. And I just believe that there was, that he's up there now looking out over all of us, and him, Phil, and Eddie, and just saying, I got your back, because he always did. He had everybody's back, and he always made everybody better. Anyway, Jim?
Thanks, Frank. So I should point out that one member of our group is missing is Al. He, it was a great story how at one AES performance, he was secretly hitting the mute button on Frank's microphone during the stage event.
I was wondering where he was just a minute ago.
Me too.
But yeah, no, wonderfully said, Frank. Thank you. So like others here, I met Al in early 80s, 81, 82 around Sound Labs. He was probably doing something with Time and La Puma, maybe Brenda Russell, something along that. But it wasn't until some years later when we put this group together where I really got to spend a lot of time with him. And obviously all the accolades for Al are well-deserved. I mean, as an engineer, he's the Mount Rushmore, the Washington Monument, he's all those things. And it doesn't surprise me, I get notes from all over the world, people asking about Al. It's not surprising, what a great career. But I was lucky enough to get to know him as a person. And once you got past the Al, the engineer, getting to know him as a person was a special thing too. A lot of people are talented. People on this call are immensely talented. Al was supremely talented. But to me, as a person, what Al was about was his strength of character. When Al, it could be right or it could be wrong, but you knew where Al was coming from. And you always knew whether he was right or wrong, that it was coming from his heart. It was something he believed. And if he felt somebody was being wronged or endangered, look out. Because even though his stature was diminutive, he was never, ever the smallest guy in the room. That was not Al's personality. In fact, it was rare that Al would say, I don't know, what do you think? Because Al knew what he thought, and Al wasn't afraid to express it. He had a lot of courage. He had courage. He was a brave person to stand up for what he thought was right. And, even when I disagreed with him, I knew where that was coming from. And I knew, that if Al knew other things, maybe he'd have a different opinion, but I always respected him because he deserved respect. He deserved respect. He earned it. And, his defense of people, his defense of animals, all those things that Al found a passion for were not going to be set aside. He was never, ever going to compromise on what he thought was the right thing. And that was joyous and learning, and made me respect him more and more and more and more. He was just that person. And I think a lot of us on this call would have to say that Al was special in so many ways, but if he wasn't the person he was, I don't know if he would be as famous as engineer as he is. And I was lucky to spend the last 15 years with him. And as far as, being on time, you can imagine what it was like to try and organize phone calls between these 7 or 8 personalities with schedules, different time zones, all that stuff. That is a miracle on ice just to pull that off. Every call, Al was the first one on waiting every time. And it didn't matter if it was stupid early hours on the West Coast or when it was. If Al said he was going to be there, he was there. And hey, Jim, what's going on? You know, it was that, and you had to be ready because Al was ready to go because that's Al, you know. So, you know, my heart goes out to Lisa. I know that a lot of us will be there for her, and the respect we all have for Al will not linger. It will maintain. It will persevere. And the special thing we all got to do was we got to see the interaction between Eddie and Al, two of the great personalities of our lifetimes. And hopefully we can remember that and keep smiling and remember those good things, because they deserve to be carried with us. They deserve to be with us in everything we do. And I hold a place for that. I hold a place for them in my heart. So,
you know, the other thing I remember about those calls, Jim, is where's Frank?
I know, but I got to tell you, you know, talking about Al reminds me of a time when I was always a bit intimidated by Al. Now, I'm the tallest guy in the room usually, and he's the shortest guy in the room. But I would not. I'll tell you, there are times he would shoot me a look that was about as intimidating as it gets. I'm sure you've all seen the look.
Oh yeah.
At one point or another, he could do more with those eyes than just about anybody I know. But I remember one time I had gone to an AES meeting with Bruce Wadeen, and Bruce was holding court. And at one point, I said to Bruce, I said, "So I understand you learned everything you know from your grandfather, Al Schmitt." And so Al, of course, got that wind of this. And the next day, we all did a panel together. And of course, I walked in late. And but as I sat down, I looked over at Al, and he had that look, and I knew I did something wrong. And but he was cordial during the thing. And then afterwards, he took me out back, and he said, "So, bam, boom." You know, there's no way I was going to intimidate him anymore, because he looked up at me like this and said, "So I heard you made fun of me last night." And I said, "No, I wasn't making fun of you. It was just." And he said, "Oh," he started out with, "I got a bone to pick with you." And the way he said that was enough. And but knowing of his Golden Gloves history, I was not about to take that on. But he had a way of just knowing when he really did. He didn't suffer fools lightly, and he would tell you if he thought you screwed up. And he'd also be more than generous with his compliments if he thought you did really well.
By the way, you guys all look fantastic in your ties.
That's right. This is all.
Niko, you want to tell us about the ties?
Niko, yeah.
The reason that the ties happened is a bet that I made with Al in over the holidays in Paola, Salvatore's office at Capitol, 2010. I walked in and Al was sitting on the sofa and he was reading GQ magazine, which to me was doubly hysterical, A, because he's reading GQ, and B, I only own JCPenney t-shirts. That's all I ever lived in. And so I looked at it, and the only cynical thing I could think of was it should really be EQ, not GQ. What are you doing? And he looked at me totally serious, and he goes, "Neeks, it says here that ties and casual pants are coming in next year. You might want to try it. It might help this miserable excuse of a career you have." That's, for Al, that's like a complimentary good morning. And I looked at him and I says, "Oh yeah, all right, well listen, if you do it, I'll do it." Well, little did I know that Al has a collection of, I don't know, 1,000 Italian silk ties. He's got them, just collected them forever, because he loved dressing up. I didn't even own a tie, but the bet was on. So I went to Macy's and bought a tie. And in January, I started my room at Capitol, and I showed up, and Al was there, and he had a tie on and I had a tie on. And to my knowledge, neither of us has done a session in a studio without a tie since then. So it's 11 years now. Yeah, he didn't always wear ties, but he was not about to lose a bet to me.
Certainly not for $5. No.
And to supplement the story and show you how serious it got, I didn't know that Al was in New York, and I was in New York doing working on a track at Avatar. And Al was in town with Lisa. They had an apartment there. And so he just walks in the control room, and I look over and holy shit, Al. And he goes, I just want to make sure you were wearing a tie. And then he walked out. And thank God I was. So I never lost. And I guess now we're kind of stuck with ties forever.
Yeah.
Well, don't expect me to carry on the tradition.
Stuck with hair as good as yours, you don't need a tie.
I love you guys.
Looking all groovy anywhere, you know?
That's true.
Is it Andrew's turn?
Yeah. Well, I just had to pop in here because I want to. Now we heard an allusion that this was a $5 bet, but what were the terms of the bet?
Let's just leave it at I'm always wearing a tie.
Okay. All right. He will come back from the beyond to enforce that bet. Yeah.
You
All
know,
right.
Getting a heavy bag is just the polite version of stories about Al.
Yeah.
That's right. Yeah, I had to look up what the word irascible meant.
Well, guys, it's absolutely amazing, and I think we'll probably all come back on at the very end of this, and there'll be some more stories. But it's hard to find a group of people who have known Al as well and for as long as you guys, and that's not a reflection on how unbelievably old you all are. So don't worry about that. But how'd I do? So we actually have a video though from someone who has known Al even longer than you guys. So I want to play that now. So that's what we're going to do. Some guy named Jeff Greenberg, I think.
That's Moses.
Yeah, exactly. So this is Jeff, one of Al's oldest friends he's known him since, I think, well, he says in the video, so I'm not even going to say anything else about it. If you don't know who Jeff is, he runs the Village Recorders and is an absolute legend in the recording business. So here is a little video from Jeff.
Hi, I'm Jeff Greenberg from The Village. This is a moment I never thought I'd have to witness or experience, but I'm going to speak to you about my friend Al. Al was one of a kind and yet a member of one of the most amazing fraternities of giants I've ever known in my life. Another one of our friends, about a little over a year ago, Ed Schnee, got sick, and Al and Chuck and Eliott and Franck all came out and got in bed with Ed that night to let him know how he was loved. And all these people loved Al the same. It was a community of brothers and giants, as I said. I met Al 52 years ago, 1968. I was managing a band, and I wanted the guy that produced the Jefferson Airplane, and he did a great record. Like everything he did. If you look at his Grammys and you look at his discography from Count Basie onwards to Peter Gunn, I mean, I'm sure nobody needs to be, familiarized with all he's done. We began a friendship. We were roommates. I was in the studio when he did Alone together with Dave Mason. He was with me when I ran the Greek. I mean, we had more fun. And we had some tough times too. I remember there was a time when Al thought he lost his hearing after his BMW got hit. I would say we're best friends. As many people on this video will probably feel and say too, I don't think anybody can claim to love Al more than any number of people here today. But I loved him with everything in my heart. And I could tell you a million different stories. We were once in Sausalito about trying to produce a movie with the Grateful Dead, Santana, and the Jefferson Airplane, and it's been pretty much the story of my life, the dork in the room. But Al still loved me and was my friend. I pretty much got to a place in my life through substance abuse and everything else where I was pretty much all alone, which happens to people that get like that. My one friend on the planet would call me. How you doing, Jeff? You gotta come out with me. I found this thing called yoga. It's amazing. I go, Al, I'm busy. 2 weeks later, Jeff, I found this thing called A Course in Miracles. You should come see it. The girls are amazing. And Al, I'm sorry, but I'm busy. And that same day, he called back an hour later and said, Jeff, there's a party tomorrow night. There's a whole bunch of people here, from the Greek in the studio, and we want you to come. Al, I'm sorry, I'm busy. Half hour later, Jeff, there's a real cute girl here, and we told her about you, and she wants to meet you. And being the Beetlejuice type of person I was at that time, I went, oh. And I went to the party, but it wasn't a party. It was a meeting of Alcoholics Anonymous. Al Schmitt had tricked me in to saving my life. That was 33 years ago. And a little after that, a young lady I knew I met at the Greek, a friend. Father started a recording studio. It was about to be liquidated, asked if I could come save it. I went with Al. We came and looked at it. It was pretty much an over with dump, but we saw a couple records that were good, and Al had known about the place. We decided to give it a try. The family hired Al on at my behest as a consultant, and Al, for 2 years, dictated every wiring, interface, interconnect, everything that would be necessary for a state-of-the-art studio, which is what this place is today. I truly do owe Al my life. And because of Al, and because he tricked me into getting sober, A, I'm alive, and B, I have a pretty amazing life, albeit a much emptier one now, without my very, very dearest and best friend. To Lisa, to Al's children and grandchildren that he loves so much, my sympathy, my heart is with you. We've all lost a giant. We've lost a true giant. And what he's left us is sweetness, the sweetness of his smile, the beautiful sound of his voice, the somehow sugary, sweet sounds that all his strings and vocals and recordings contained. He was proud of almost everything he did. And I know I'm the most proud that I could call myself a friend of Al Schmitt. I'll miss him forever.
Hey everybody, it's me, and hold on, let me pin my video because we're in speaker mode now, which means that Zoom is going to take care of all of our video switching, which that can't go well, but hopefully it will go well. So just before we get into, we've got another small list of people who wanted to come on and just talk about Al. I'm going to take this opportunity to talk about Al, and I've just got two quick stories. One is that about 6 years ago, when we first moved to the UK, my wife and I were staying with her mother. So we're at my mother-in-law's place out in the middle of nowhere. And as anyone who's lived with their mother-in-law knows, as lovely as she was, you still got to get out of the house. So we would go to the pub each night just to give her some time. We'd get some time, go out for about an hour, hour and a half, and then we'd come back and my wife would play Scrabble with her or something like that. And every once in a while, my wife's mom would put on some music to listen to, and they had a stereo, the typical, like, mom and the kids go away for a weekend, get back, and dad's bought a stereo, but this was 1968, so it actually sounded amazing. Some big Wharfdale speakers and a Sansui amp, and so every once in a while she would listen to something, and we walked through the door, and I heard about 3 seconds of this record, and I said, I don't know who's playing trumpet, but that's gotta be Al Schmitt. And I walked over and picked up the CD case and looked, and it was a Chris Botti record that Al had done. And I immediately emailed Al just to tell him the story. Because, I mean, it was instantaneous when I walked through that door. And he said, oh, yeah, that's a pretty good record. Manager was a pain in the ass, though. So that was very Al. And the only other thing, and this will actually transition us into our next speaker, because Steve Genewick was on this session. In 2013, Al did a 2-day seminar recording a big band. And I was at home in my studio. I'm sure I was supposed to be mixing, but of course I wasn't. And I was looking at email or Facebook or wherever they announced this seminar. And before the little ding of the incoming email had stopped, I had signed up for the seminar. Like, I am absolutely going to do this. I was lucky enough to do a few sessions where Al was recording an orchestra on projects I was working on. But I thought, man, to not have any responsibility and get to be in the control room and watch him do what he does will be amazing. So we show up for the first day. We're tracking a big band for the first day, and then he was going to mix on the second day, which he only slowed it down, I think, because we had to stop for lunch. Otherwise, the album would have been done the first day. So we're all sitting in the back of the room after walking around, and he's showing us the microphones. And this is at Capitol, so it's great microphones in a great room with great players. And a lot of people can say that that's why those records sound good, but it's a hell of a lot more than that. So we're sitting in the control room. All the mics are open. Everybody's warming up. There's never a, hey, can I hear the drums? Hey, can I hear this? People are just warming up in the room. Al's doing a bit. Doesn't seem like he's doing much. And I'm listening to these microphones, especially like the drum overheads. And I'm thinking, man, that sounds dark. And I would have been diving for the EQ on this. And it's going through a pair of Neves, because that's what he was using for the mic pre's. I'm thinking, man, get that shelf in there, crank that thing up. That's a bit dark. And wow, the horns sound a bit distant. What the hell is going on here? So then they go for the first run through. And as Frank said, they're in record, because of course you're getting take one. And it's one of those charts, which, as most big band charts do, starts with this big chord, and then you go into the rhythm section before the head starts. That first chord hit and sounded so amazing that I laughed out loud to the point where Al had to turn around and go, shh. It was incredible. It was effortless, seemingly. It was natural. And as someone alluded to before, he could sit down at a console, and just by listening, he made it sound better. Just incredible. And so our next speaker, let's call him speaker, I guess, it's a little weird, is Steve Genewick, who is in the room for years and years watching this magic happen every single day. So Steve, if you can come in, I'll make sure to pin your video, and then you are on.
Thanks, Andrew. First of all, I sat next to Al for 20 some years, and he never mixed with the monitors on. I don't know why he didn't show you guys how to do that. Like, it makes the mixing go so fast, but we can talk about that later.
Well, my meters are always pinned, so it wouldn't have worked for me.
Anyway, thanks for having me. You know, everybody said, just pick a story to tell. Well, that's pretty hard. Picking a story. There's so many stories. But to kind of tag on to what some of you guys were saying, we a few years ago we got hired to do a Trisha Yearwood, or not Trisha Yearwood. That we did get hired to do that work, but Martina McBride Christmas album, big band Christmas album, and it was the usual stuff. Find out what it's going to be, do the setup, all that kind of stuff, and came time to. And for some reason on this session, and I'm not sure why, we had a really early downbeat. It was like a 9 a.m. downbeat, which is terribly early, especially on a record date. So as usual, I'm there at literally 5 o'clock in the morning, because you got to get everything set up and everything else. And I show up at the studio at Capitol at 5 a.m. and John McBride is sitting in the parking lot waiting for me. I thought, man, okay. I knew he was going to bring a mic or something, but 5 a.m. I said, John, what are you doing? It's 5 o'clock in the morning. He said, I want to see the whole thing. I want to see the whole thing, start to finish. I got to see the whole thing. All right, well, come on down, So we go down, and, he's looking around, and the guys are there with me, and we're setting up and doing our, clicking the mics, doing our normal thing. Al shows up terribly early, I'm sure. The whole thing goes down, and John spent the entire day sitting next to Al on the other side of the console. Didn't say a word, just sat there. When people would come in, he would get up and move back, but didn't say anything all day. So we get through the day, it's double session. We probably did half the album in that day. And session's over, and we were switching to different stuff the next day. So there was a lot of stuff to be taken down. So by the end of it, it was just me and John again in the control room. Everybody had left, and I'm repatching and getting ready for tomorrow and whatnot. And John, he finally just, he's shaking his head. And I said, what, John, did you have a question or something? What do you want to know? He looked, he said, that was the most complicated nothing I'd ever seen in my entire life. And, that kind of sums up how Al worked. It was never an effort. It was never, like somebody said, it was never, can I hear the drums? Can I, we just kind of did it. And yeah, there was a system behind it. And, we could get into the nuts and bolts of how it actually worked. But, it just happened. And those records, all the records we made on the best days, you show up and there was always laughing and food and, carrying on and, telling stories. And somehow at the end of the day, you always had a record and it always sounded great. Those big, huge sessions, I know both of us, we loved those sessions. And again, if you, we were there really early, and if Al said he was going to be there at 9 a.m., he was going to be there at 8:30 a.m. and you better be ready for him because, there was no late, there was not being in record for take one or the rehearsal was just, it wasn't that he had to tell you that it wasn't acceptable. You just knew. So, part of that is good teachers. I had spent a lot of time with Al before I became his everyday assistant with my friend Bill Smith, who was his assistant before me, who unfortunately can't be with us here today. He had some stuff going on, but those big sessions were so much fun. But for me personally, the best time I ever had was when it was just the two of us. It was just a hang. We became such good friends over the years. And when it was just the two of us, it was relaxed. And, we'd just make a record, we'd mix for a while. And then, back in the day, we might go out and smoke a cigar. If there was a ball game on, we might watch the ball game for a little bit. We always got more work done than anybody else in the day. He still mixed 4 or 5 songs a day. That was simple. But, it was never a chore to do that. The ones that became a chore, once in a while you get some stuff, we all get them. It's difficult. The ones that were difficult weren't as much fun. But, you did them all. But those records, when it was just us, that was the best. Just the two of us in the room. We could do what we wanted to at our own pace. And, I'm gonna miss those days the most. That's for sure. So, yeah, I don't want to, it's a rough day, rough week at my house, but I know we'll all miss Al terribly. I know I'll miss him terribly. I already do. So, yeah, don't have much more to say.
Yeah, I think the best part of the 2-day recording seminar was at around 5 o'clock on the first day after we'd successfully tracked like 700 songs, and we all went outside. And Al, there was a box of cigars. There were enough cigars for anybody who wanted to smoke, and Al told stories. And I think we were there till 8:30 or 9. Nobody wanted to leave.
Nope.
Anybody else doing that seminar, you'd be like, hey, man, let's get back in the studio. I paid for this. Al, the stories were worth just as much as anything.
Well, and because of the way Al worked, there wasn't, this is how I set up my snare. Because there wasn't a lot of technical stuff, a lot of times him talking was the seminar. We did seminars all the time with Mix with the Masters and all that kind of stuff. We used to say at Mix with the Masters, we'd go out for lunch outside. For those who haven't been there, you take a lunch break and you usually go outside if the weather's nice. Sometimes we sit outside all afternoon and talk. And that was as much instruction as we could get in the control room doing something, was just Alec, because he didn't use gear the way a lot of us do. You wanted to get the how he did it, the philosophical reason of why he was doing something, or more importantly, why he wasn't doing something, and why you didn't have to go down that road. So yeah, or even on a session when, he would get the band in as soon as he could, do a take, get everybody to come in. And when they came in and listened, these are great musicians. They knew what had to be done. So they would come in and listen, they'd go back out there and it would get better. And Al didn't have to, he didn't have to adjust anything. He just had to go, look, is that what you want? Okay. And they would go back out and adjust. It was really quite an incredible thing to watch. I always tell sometimes Al fixing the guitar was him going out and talking to the guitar player, or whatever that was. Maybe even not about the guitar sound, but about something. and then at the end you go, can you add a little top to the amp, and and that was it. So it was always so effortless and a pleasure to watch, and my privilege to sit next to him for 20 some years.
Yeah, I think for any of us who got to be in the control room while he was working, it was the opportunity to watch him listen. And that's where his magic was the way he listened and what he focused on, because the moves were tiny, the gear was nothing, there's nothing going on with that. But he listened in a way that was more compelling, I think, than just about anybody I've ever been in the room with. Really, really amazing.
I used to play a game while we were mixing. Every morning, because I'd come in and set the songs up and stuff. And it got to be a game where I would start the mix, obviously. And not obviously, but I would. And my game was to start the mix and see what he would change when he came in. And, there were a few times where, I was thinking, I got him this time. I got it. This sounds really good. I got it. And he'd come in and move 3 faders and the whole thing would go, and I'm like, son of a bitch, he got me again. I never got him. Never got him. But that's the way I learned, was I do it and then watch what he changed. It was great.
Yeah, absolute genius. Thanks so much, Steve. And as you said, Bill Smith couldn't be here today, but we will be doing an evening with the people who worked with Al at some point later on in this series. So next, we have another Bill, but totally different Bill. Bill Schnee, if you could pop your video on and unmute. And
I did it.
Love to hear you say something, good or nasty, whatever you got about Al.
Can you not hear me?
No,
yes,
gotcha.
Bill, you put a tie on. Did you tie?
Well, as George is pointing out, it would take something like Al to get this out of me, or on me, actually. So, yes, like all of the gentlemen before me, you're hearing the same kind of thing over and over. I suppose you'll continue to hear it, only because it's all true. What a guy. So I teared up a couple of times already, and I am a crier, so I'm going to try to get through this okay. Bear with me if I don't. What a sissy. My early mentor, a guy named Toby Foster, when I was learning, I said, well, who do you think are great engineers? And this is when I'm learning, like what's a dynamic mic? What's a ribbon mic? And he said, Phil Ramone and Al Schmitt. Listen to those records. Well, as it turns out, I had already been listening to Al Schmitt records. When I was 13, I got into stereo, hi-fi. And I made my way to Henry Mancini records, of all things. Why? Because they sounded great. And in those days, engineers didn't get credit very often. But evidently, Henry made sure that Al got credit on all of his records. So of course, with my name Schnee, I remember the name Schmitt pretty easily. So when Toby said that, I went, oh, I know that Al Schmitt. I love those records. It wasn't necessarily the style that I was going to be getting into. I was starting off in rock, but I loved the sound of the records. So, and then of course, as I get into the business, I found out I'd been listening to his records 4 or 5 years before that with Sam Cooke and other records that he had done before I was ever interested in engineering. But I got interested in engineering and I started working in engineering, and I found my way to a studio called Sound Labs. And this is the early 70s. That was owned by Armin Steiner. And lo and behold, Al came in and worked in the adjacent studio. Oh wow, I gotta meet him. And so I said to Armin, you gotta introduce me, please. So at a convenient time, he did that. And then subsequent to that, I was in the mix room and he was in the recording room. He came in to see what I was doing and sat there and listened for a little bit. And like the gentleman before me that said they were shaking in their boots, I was too. And but he was, as always, as I came to find out, always extremely complimentary. And he went back to his room. So a few days later, I said, if we can possibly work it out, I'd love to have a lunch with you. And he said, sure, absolutely. So we went to, we've set up a time and went to Villa Capri, which was one of his favorite Italian restaurants at the time. And we sat down and started chatting. And I said, Al, I listened to those Henry Mancini records. when I first got into hi-fi. And I've got to say, you are a genius. He goes, I'm not a genius. What are you talking about? I said, well, I've been to the RCA studios on Sunset, and there's no way in the world that that sound, that I could ever dream of getting that sound of those records out of those rooms. And he looked at me like I was an idiot, and he said, I didn't do those in that room. I did those in the original RCA studio on Sunset and Vine. It was an incredible room. I could never have gotten those sounds in that room either. And I went, oh, you're not a genius. But of course, he really was. And you've heard it before, and from the other guys, and with me too. You know, in some part, it's not so much, it's almost like it's not what he did, it's what he didn't do. But however he did it. And again, piling on what the others have said, over the years, what I come to find out is even better than his talent and his natural talent, ability, and how he developed it is the human being himself. And, you know, that's like all of us. That's going to really, I'm missing it now.
Thanks so much for that, Bill. Yeah, I think I've been so busy trying to get ready for this that fortunately, it hasn't really sunk in, the size of the hole that he's left behind. But it's colossal and growing. But also, I think something like tonight is really great to help us get through it in a lot of ways. So next, a young man named Tommy Vicari would like to speak. So Tommy, if you could switch on. Where are you? Hold on. I'm juggling here. There he is.
There. Okay. I'm unmuted?
Yep. All good.
Oh, hi. Well, you know, one of the great things about what it is that we do is and like Frank was saying, there's more to it than just the technology. And every day you get to go to the studio, and you get to be a part of a moment when magic happens. And as an engineer, you kind of have to be ready for when the magic happens. You know, that's why, you know, things like getting there early and things like that, because I did that too. I at the beginning, you know, I would show up early, you know, and anything that can go wrong will go wrong. So, you know, getting there 2 hours early now is just part of the deal. I first met Al Schmitt. I was working at A&M, and I was working under, I was assisting Hank Sicalo. And one night, it was 1974, I think. And he said, come on, we're going to go over to Capital A, and we're going to see Al. And so we went over, and they had just finished recording George Benson's Masquerade. Okay, and Tommy LaPuma is there, and there are all the musicians. They're still in their seats, and we walk into Studio A, and they're playing back Masquerade with George Benson singing over the loudspeakers. That was like the first time I had ever met him, and you know, and this was one of those moments, like being in the room when, you know, they recorded Tapestry, or, you know, Mad Dogs and Englishmen, or you know, we've all experienced this, you know, where you start recording from the beginning of the session. You don't wait, you know, you record everything. It's like page 1 of the engineering handbook. But I think the thing to stress here is we all know how great of an engineer he was, and what he did and what he didn't do and all that. But the thing is that, you know, the man himself was just a very generous, funny, volatile at times. But you know, I was too working at Sound Labs with Armin Steiner, and you know, I worked with Al Jr. as an assistant. I worked with Steve as an assistant at Lion Share, and so we became 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 close because of the family relations, and when my wife was pregnant, Al, threw a shower for her, or Al's wife at the time. A lot of our conversations, interestingly enough, were about family. We're about baseball. We're about, because I would typically always go in and say hello. Well, I was presented an award the other night at the Cinema Audio Society. And I said, when you walk down that hallway into Capitol Studios, you're walking into history. You walk into this, you come down to the end of the hallway and you walk into Studio A and you're walking into, history there. And when you do that, you become part of that history, if you have the opportunity to work there. And whenever I worked there, and I spent a lot of time in that building, and typically every time I'd be doing something, whether it was the Oscars or a big band or a movie or whatever it is, Al would come in from next door, and he would come in the room. There'd be producers and cameras, and he would walk up and he would give me a kiss, and everybody would go like, "It's Al Schmitt." I said, yeah, we do this regularly. It was just like one of those greetings. He was just like family, it was something that I'll always remember and really, really miss, but the thing is you getting to work behind guys like Phil and Al and Bill and and George and all those guys. I didn't really assist George or Eliott but I would have loved to, because they were always made my favorite records, but at A&M I got to work. We're missing Bruce Botnick, we're missing Hank Sakala, we're missing Ray Gerhardt, we're missing, Dick Bogert, we're missing Henry Louis, we're missing, there's a lot of guys that you get to work behind or watch work, and you take a little bit from everybody, and it kind of comes out you. But I think Al was just when we went to Ed's memorial, he came out and we were obviously very upset. And he said to me, "I'm not going." He says, "I'm not going to go." And for some reason, I kind of believed him. I kind of believe like, he's not going, and then when it finally happened, it was, of course, shocking. And it's, when you figure we just lost Sammy Nestico at 96, we lost Ed last year. There's a lot of our colleagues that we're losing, so I think it's important to pay homage to these people and to know like Armin Steiner, and Bill, and all you guys on there. I really feel fortunate to be able to Sammy used to say, when you do something you love, you'll never work a day in your life. You know what I mean? And I kind of think that's what we've managed to luck into in a way. And being around guys like Al, because Al was always very supportive, always, he would walk in at any moment and stand behind and encourage and be supportive and then we, the thing was our relationship was more on a personal level too. It wasn't just that I admired him as an engineer. I admired him as a person. We all had our ups and downs. He had his, he corrected them, but he had a way of making you feel like when he was talking to you, and this is why the outpouring of love from around the world is what it is because when you were engaged in a conversation, he had a way of making you feel like you were the only one in the room, you know, and you could, and he had your attention. He was listening to you, you know. So I think those are the things I'll miss the most about Al is not knowing he's in the other room, you know, not knowing that I won't see him again. You know, that's, you know, his engineering was obviously what it is. It's and it goes back. I mean, you know, yeah, I was listening to Sam Cooke. I mean, A Change Is Going to Come, I think, is one of the greatest records ever made for many, many reasons. You know, I mean, just the history of it and everything. Not many people know that, you know, that he did those records, you know, or Hatari or all of that stuff. So, but, you know, you look at the list of the artists that he's worked with and you can't really, nobody really matches up to that. I don't think that's just going to be something that won't be, you know, it's like records that won't be broken, you know? You know, Ed was another guy. Ed was the guy that I knew for years. You know, we had personal. I think the thing about our group of people is that there are these personal relationships that go far beyond just getting a drum sound. You know, and it's like, A, you have to be ready when the magic happens. B, you have to make the artist comfortable. You know, and Al had all that. He had that ability. He had the ability to make them comfortable and be able to get the best out of people. And I think that's, other than the technology, I think that's one of the most important factors about being an engineer, is to be ready when the magic happens. Because if you miss it, you know, it's gone. You know, so
yeah.
Anyway, I think that's what, you know, my recollection of this whole thing, you know, and even, you know, my whole family feels the loss. So as we all do. So.
Well, and I think something that's really becoming, I mean, it's obvious, I think, to us, but maybe sometimes we don't feel that it even needs to be said, but maybe it does need to be said, especially in this larger context, is that with some people, they had home studios that were their home, and like Capitol was Al's home. So yeah, Al could walk into any room in Capitol and it's like, oh, hey, Al's here. Al could walk into any control room in the world and
right.
Whoever was working would just say, oh, Al's here. I mean, they basically invented the Grammys because they had to give that guy an award. Like, he is music making. He is record making. It's not a guy who did this record and that record and that record. He was there pretty much the entire time, working at the highest level and making important records. And it's not even just a matter of being there to capture the magic. The magic was more magical because he was the guy capturing it.
Well, and I think the genius is that, you know, it picking the right microphones, you know, not getting in the way of the performance, not getting in the way. I saw engineers tell piano players to play harder with the right hand than play with the left hand. I thought, what the hell are you saying? What, you know, I mean, you're supposed to be invisible in a way until I mean, you know, Hank used to say, you know, when I was his assistant, he'd say, you know, you don't have an opinion unless somebody asks you. You know, it's not like, well, I think. And then they would go, well, did somebody ask you? No, nobody asked me. So, you know, I mean, yeah, I mean, the genius of it is, and Armin is this way too. And a lot of, I think a lot of us feel this way. You know, less is basically more. And then you do what you need to do. I mean, Ed used to joke, I told him it was okay to put 100 cycles at 100 dB. I never said that to him, but it was like, you know, the point is that if you need to do something, then you do it. But the genius is picking the mic, placing the mics, and then the rest, the musicians, like we all know, do pretty much the rest. Yeah. And then I will do whatever it is that makes the music, because in the end, it's all really about the music. It's not about, oh, well, that's the greatest snare sound I've ever heard. I mean, it doesn't, it's about either the song moves you or it doesn't. And it doesn't, a lot of the great records aren't sonic masterpieces. It's the music.
Yeah.
So
absolutely.
So I think we have a tendency to get hung up, we get blinded by the science in a way, some way.
Yeah. And I think also in almost every session that I was ever in, that Al was involved in, even if he was the engineer for the day, for the strings on a record that someone else was the main engineer and someone else was producing, everybody wanted to know what Al thought because it was important. And that's not the case with a lot of people. So that's really great. Thank you so much, Tommy.
Okay.
So next, we have tongue-tied Chandler Harrod, who's been working with Al quite a bit recently. So Chandler, if you can pop your video on, and then I can find you in the morass that is Zoom, and then you have the stage.
Yeah, I was lucky enough to work with Al quite a bit the last 10 years or so. He was, got to know him as a friend, and I'll always love him. Couple instances that stick out. The first session I ever did with Al, I forget what the record was. I'd been working at Capitol about a week, and it was a mix session. And long story short, it was a corrupt hard drive, and we were having trouble getting going. But Al was a gentleman through it. And at some point he said, "Don't worry, you'll figure it out. It's the big leagues." And I was just like, "Oh no." But he was kind enough to let me keep working with him. And one of my favorite memories of him working with him was the Bob Dylan Shadows in the Night record. Bob, we had the band in there rehearsing, everyone was getting comfortable. Bob walks in and he says, he's kind of standing in the middle of the room, and at some point he says, "We're not going to use headphones on this record." So I was like, "Go take the headphones away." So we did, and they rehearsed a couple times, and after a couple rehearsal, Al looks back at me, the 24 tracks running, Pro Tools running, half track or half inch is running. Al looks back at me and says, "Chandler, I think you better go get ready with a vocal mic. I think Bob's getting ready to sing a vocal." So I sneak out into the live room and I grab the 47, and I'm just standing there while they're, behind Bob while they're finishing rehearsing the one song. And Bob turns around and looks at me and goes, "I think I'm ready to do a vocal. Where should I go?" And I said, "Well, you look comfortable here. How about here?" And he goes, "Here's good." And when I walked back in the control room, Al just laughed and smiled at me and goes, "Here's good." And that's just something that's always stuck with me. And like, we would joke about it, in sessions over the years, like, "Oh, where do you want this?" And he'd be like, "Here's good." And I always thought that any day that I got to work with Al, it was a good day. And I always often thought to myself, "Here's good," and he was just, as everyone mentioned, he was an amazing engineer. The electrons just lined up better for him than they would anyone else. And, but the thing I'll always remember about Al, and I hope to carry forward in my life, is to treat everyone fairly and with kindness. Because whether you were the runner at the studio or the president of the record label or Paul McCartney, he treated everyone with respect and love and kindness. And that's what I'll always value most about Al.
Amazing. So good. And the stories of those Bob Dylan sessions, the fact that it couldn't be anything like a recording session, and yet those albums are incredible. I panic just thinking about having to do a session like that.
Andrew, there was a go ahead, Chandler.
Al never said where to put the vocal. I just asked Bob, and he was like, "I'm comfortable here." And it was like an unspoken thing. Al was like, "Just put the mic in front of him and it'll be fine."
I remember when I was doing an interview with Al about a session that Al had done with Frank Sinatra and Phil Ramone. And Al was telling me this a couple of weeks ago. And he goes out to, Frank is out in the room with Al, had set up the whole band. And then Phil had made an entire kind of booth for Frank to sing his vocal in. Because, Phil was always concerned about leakage and things like that. So Frank is standing out there, and so they says, "All right, where do you want me?" And Phil says, "Well, we'd like you over there in the booth. And Frank says, I'm not going in there. I want to do it right here. And so Phil, always being not confrontational, looks to Al to say, he doesn't want to use the booth. And Al says, that's fine. He can do it right here, because Phil was hoping for a little reinforcement. And he says, no, that's fine. And Al just gave him a handheld 57, and he recorded the whole album there, which went on to sell about 6 million records or something like that. So that's the thing about Al, was if the artist is comfortable right here, I don't care what we set up, we're going to make this work.
Absolutely.
And I know we're all going one at a time, but just to hop onto Chandler's story, because it's the same day, really. Al was also a huge fan of music and artists. He wasn't the king of the mountain and everybody came to him. He loved, and he was a real fan. So that day, that Bob Dylan thing, the week before, we had been mixing the Grammys did a 50th anniversary tribute to the Beatles. I don't know if you guys remember that. So a live TV show that they did, and we were mixing that show. And we were on we had a week to do that, and then we were gonna go do these Bob Dylan sessions. And as usual, everything ran long. And we were mixing the Paul and Ringo portion of that show. We were mixing the Beatles. And during the day, we had to go long. So suddenly we're in 2 rooms, and I'm kind of finishing mixes in A, and, they're starting Bob Dylan in B. And Al comes over and he just smiles. He goes, Steve, how cool is this? We have the Beatles in one room and Bob Dylan in the other room. And it came from it wasn't, look how cool we are. It was, I'm such a fan of this. Isn't this great? Like what we get to do. He was genuinely a fan of the music. He loved the music. It was just great.
Yeah, unbelievable. But we've all had days like that, right? No, we haven't. But thanks very much, Chandler. It was great. And so I'd like to bring on somebody who doesn't get enough credit because she's usually behind the scenes, though she is quite the film star from a little movie called Sound City, but she's spent quite a bit of her life at Capitol Studios. So Paola, if you're around, you could pop your video on. I'd love to pin your video and make you large like that.
All right. Aww. What a joy to see you guys. It really makes my heart feel good. Should I go on?
Yeah, it's all you.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, hello, everyone out there. I know our hearts are joined together in sorrow and loss. But today we can celebrate our beloved friend. All weekend long, I'm trying to think of quotes from Al. I know you've all said a few, which is great. But one I always remember, he said, I lie when I tell my wife I'm going to work. And that's how Al always described his passion for his work every day. And he was contagious, and he was like a nucleus in our studio. He just started things happening all the time. Day to day, it was just wonderful seeing him every day. He'd always come in and give me a hug and say hi, and he'd make sure he greeted everybody. He was just like a glass of sweet orange juice, But sometimes when he needed to escape from whatever frustration he was going on in the studio, he would come sit in my office and vent. And then until he had a laugh, and then he'd be all set. He'd get ready to go back. So how lucky was I, right? Talk about attracting people. Not only was he funny, entertaining, and such a wonderful person, but he had the greatest stories, as you know. Paul McCartney even said he was encouraged to tell his own stories after working with Al on Kisses on the Bottom and Live Kisses. And Paul really fell in love with Al too, as you know. When Paul sent confirmation that he would write the foreword to Al's book that Maureen was writing, all Al could write back was, wow. When complimented, Al was the most humble man of a few words. Except when he spoke to visitors and students, he was always wanting to inspire them and make them feel just good about life, I sometimes talked him into some crazy engineering projects because I'd get the call and I say, oh, do you know about Al Schmitt? And they'd be like, oh yeah, how can I get him? I said, oh, I can, you know, and he'd be right down the hall. So I talked him into starring as himself in The Bachelor. He had to record the couple serenading each other of a Seal song in Studio B. And at the same time, then he had to run over to Studio A to record Seal. So he would just give me that Al look like, what have you got me into? But he always was a good sport. So as long as it was fun and he got paid and he was at Capitol, he was fine, you know. And he was such a man of style and grace. I know he set the example for all you boys. He started the wear the tie to work look. I found out it was on a bet, but I just thought it was to bring some class back to the recording studios, Niko. Because you all looked a lot good in your ties. So, you know, most people like to come to studios to see what kind of famous people they'll see. And of course they do. But when Al Schmitt was in, they only wanted to meet him. And he was always so gracious. He welcoming them in, taking a picture, playing a tune for them. He was always so gracious. You know, I can only say one thing. There's many stars in the sky and many stars on the Hollywood Walk of Fame, but our biggest superstar will always be the one and only Al Schmitt. And I love him so much. Oh, thank you. I love him so much. I can't even imagine working without him, you know? So, and I always said, I'm sticking around as long as Al's sticking around, but I'm gonna have to stick around to talk about him and keep his memory alive. You know?
Yeah. And I know
That's great, Paola.
from talking
That's
to
great.
him a few months ago that one of the things he hated the most about the lockdown was not getting into the studio. Couldn't go to Capitol. And, you know, he had plenty to do and he was a happy guy, but it was his life.
Yeah. And the last time I saw him really was with you, Niko, working on the Willie Nelson. And he was the one that, only one, you and him were the only ones that had my big parties to celebrate my 30th year. And, you know, it was funny with mask on and everything. And my heart was bursting then, you know, so made it. Mm-hmm.
I think some of the best times mixing with Al is I don't think he needed me really to help him mix. I think he liked the way I drove. And so that's how I got the beat. But the drive to and from the studio was the most hysterical. It just, you know, I had this, I mean, I'm the luckiest guy in the world because I got a minimum of 30 minutes twice a day of Al ranting about anything, you know, either shitty pitching or terrible Thai food or can we order Japanese tomorrow? It was wonderful. Yeah. And then with him was the easy part. I would just look at Genewick and laugh and figure, okay, well, one of us is going to get the menus because that's the only real hard job we have.
Yeah. I made sure whenever I booked him on a project, I said, you know, there's got to be food. He's got to have his lunch.
And it's there. When we did orchestra dates, we're digressing, Andrew, I'm sorry, but it's actually.
Please do.
And Genewick can back me up on this. We did, for Neil Young, we did this huge orchestra thing, but the thing that shows the person that Al is when you were talking about he knows what's going on. I got a call from Neil and he hadn't written anything new in like 5 years or something, which for him is really odd. And he called me up and he said, I got something new and I think I just want to go in and sing it on one mic and then figure out what to do with it. I'm not sure, maybe an orchestra. I don't know what to do, but I got to do something. So I said, don't worry about it. Just show up with lyrics to Capitol. When are you free? Got the dates. And I called Al. And Al called Steve. And we set everything up and we set up 22 different instruments in the room. I told him, no, don't even bring an instrument. I don't want anything that's got any old vibe on it. So he shows up and we're out in the studio. And if anybody knows any artist of that legacy, they're very hands-on with everything. And so Neil was ready to, okay, well, let's see what this sounds like. And we'll go in and we'll do this. And I said, no. You see him? And he looks through the window and he sees Al. And he hadn't seen Al since they recorded on the beach. And except for in the hallways. And I said, he's in there, which means we don't have to go in there. Matter of fact, we're not going to go with that. If it's good, he'll go like this. If it's not good, he'll go like this. Means another take. Just sing these words in front of whatever sounds good. So I would just move a mic around, put it in front of wherever he was, and he would sing it. Al would record it, and he'd listen and go, yeah, that was a good take. And we did the first 4 songs like that, 3 or 4 songs. Steve and Al in the control room, Neil out in the studio, and I would just kind of bounce around. And then we did arrangements and we did a whole orchestra. And the day of the orchestra, the most complicated job I had was making sure that his oatmeal was there on time and hot. That was the biggest job I had because everything else was so together and sounded so good so fast, there was nothing to do. So basically, I'm a driver and I'm breakfast food. Those are my 2 jobs when I work with Al.
Is that when you put the amp in the coffee area?
Yeah, yeah.
I got in trouble from upstairs. Oh, people walking in and out going, it sounds like Neil Young. And I'm like, yeah, it is.
Yeah, it was incredibly loud. And I walked in the control room and Al looked at me and he said, what do I do with this? And I just looked at him and I said, I don't know. You got to figure it out. That's why you're here. But I will say this about emotion and what Al can bring to something. And Andrew, you said when you heard the first chord, you just started laughing. So when we did Children of Destiny a couple years ago, which lyrically is one of the most moving songs Neil's written and one that Al really believed in, just the lyrics behind the song. It was a very emotional week. We'd had people pass in all of our lives. And all of a sudden on Friday, we're all together in the studio. And I'm, unlike Bill Schnee, I don't have access to the crying gene. It takes a lot for me to actually cry about something. So Al brings everything together and I get Neil out there and we get everything set up. And I don't know what's going on. And I just look at Steve and Steve just nods at me, everything's fine. So I'm just standing behind him. And all of a sudden they start playing and it hit the first chorus and I started crying like a baby. Like, I don't know how else to explain it. It was the most freeing emotion ever. And it was because all this volume hit me with this arrangement, this Chris Walden arrangement and these lyrics and these people, you know, there was 60 people out there playing at the same time, all hit me at once for the first time, perfectly. And I was just standing there with this impact and nobody else on the earth got to stand in that spot. And I started crying like crazy. And
how did you hear all that, Niko, without the monitors on?
It's, well, when the little needles wiggle perfectly at 0, Frank, it's emotional.
I get to sing in that because Chris was just grabbing people in the hallway and I'm like, hey, what about me? So I got to go in and that I was so, even though I was singing with like 4 other people, I was so nervous looking at Al and you in the control room. That's about the most nervous I've ever been, you know, because I didn't want to ruin my good reputation with Al.
Niko, I'm glad that experience was nice for you because in the control room, Al was doing this.
Yeah.
The guitar was so loud. We were tearing I mean, it was not fun. I mean, we did it, but he had that, you know, when he did the thing with his head, that was like, oh God, what do we do now? So yeah. I'm glad you had fun that day.
I had a gas. I got to cry and laugh at the same time. It was pretty awesome.
We got Neil's guitar and 47 microphones all in Omni.
Yeah.
We didn't need a guitar mic.
Maureen here? We should hear from Maureen.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Maureen, you want to pop your video on just real quick while she's doing that? Just Niko, I want to point out that probably had you drive him just because there was something wrong with his phone plan, because I think he used to just call Eddie. So... Yeah.
You're making me, you know, you're doing more for my self-esteem, Andrew, than any single person in my
Good, good. I'm glad I could help. So, Maureen Droney, you are the large picture on my screen.
Whoops. My light just fell off my computer, guys.
All good. Didn't notice a thing.
Wow. Listening to all of this, I've made so many notes because you guys know I take notes all the time, and so many of you, the things that you've said ring a bell. And I guess it's fitting that I'm last since I wrote the book. which was all Mike Klink's fault because he kept going around saying, somebody's got to write Al Schmitt's book. And I knew somebody needed to. And it wasn't just about engineering. It was about how do you live a life as good as Al's? How do you, how did he become this person that everybody loves and had these incredible things like being friends with Sam Cooke and recording him and the Jefferson Airplane and everybody else and having Bob Dylan say that he did the best vocals he'd had in years, I first met him when I was working with Tower of Power, and it was actually, he was recording them at Bill's Schnee's studio. And that's when I first met him. And, he was a founding member of the producers and engineers wing because with Eddie, he was the first person to sign up for the Music Producers Guild of the Americas that became the producers and engineers wing. And he was certainly a mentor for me. I have three things. One of them is a quote from Eddie, because like I said, I read all this stuff down when you guys talk, because I love some of the things you say and I want to be able to repeat them. And he said, Al had a hit in every decade of the record industry. And the thing I wanted to say for me was when I was writing the book, the publisher really wanted it to be very specific about what Al did technically, right? And Al, when he was describing like how he got a reverb or something, he would tell me, this little bell goes off in my head and I know I'm there. And Genewick, you have talked about how when sometimes there are, you're teaching seminars and people miss it. They miss what Al's teaching because they're waiting for something to happen. And he's been making it happen all along. Like somebody else said, when he would go out and talk to the guitar player, and maybe it wasn't even about where the mic was, but that would be what was happening. And that was what was making the record. And you would tell, Steve, you said you'd tell people at those seminars that pay attention right from the beginning. Just, it's happening in front of your eyes and you don't even see it. So there I was with the publisher wanting to know things like, well, exactly where does he put the microphone on the guitar amp? And Al was getting, I wrote this book over 2.5 years of my weekends and holidays, spent a lot of Saturday afternoons with Al, right? So one Saturday afternoon, I was telling him that the publisher wanted more technical stuff and he was getting really impatient and bored. He was like drumming his fingers on the table. And I said, you're getting bored, aren't you? And he goes, yeah. I go, well, he's asking things like, how far does the microphone go from the, from the guitar amp? And he said, tell him 6 inches. And the truth was he couldn't explain what he did. So for the book, I had to go to Genewick and I had to go to Niko and I had to go to Bill Smith and do little chapters on them, talking about what he did and how they learned from him by watching him and sitting behind him all that time. Because what he did was, well, wait a minute, I wrote it down, so, because I always forget. The little bell goes off in his head. But what he does is a combination, I'm going to cry. What he does is a combination of all of the music he heard and loved growing up, all of the sessions he's done in his life, and all of the artists he's worked with. He loves it so much, and it's like really inherent with him. It's a physical and emotional thing that comes out of the love he has for both music and musicians. So my last thing is, and I'm not shilling the book, although I know Al would want me to. And speaking of John McBride buys a couple hundred books and gives them to all his students, and I think that's a really good thing. So this is from the back of the book from Joe Walsh, although he originally said it when Al got his star on Hollywood Boulevard. And I asked him if we could use it as a quote for the book. And he said, yes. And he said, Al knows how to record and leave the mojo in. He made so much of the music we know and love possible. When you're stumped, you can always ask yourself, what would Al Schmitt do? Oh, and by the way, one of our members from Detroit suggested we make t-shirts that say WWASD on them. And sell them for music cares and give the money to music cares, but what would Al Schmitt do? And then Joe went on to say, for a while, people used to say that Elvis sold the most records. Then it was the Eagles, Michael Jackson, and U2. But nope. The truth is, Al Schmitt has sold more records than anybody. So that's my other quote.
And it's all very, very true.
Just to be here with you guys today and hear all the stuff that you said.
It's great that you're here, Maureen.
Yeah, it's absolutely amazing. And I think what we should do now is I'm going to release the hounds and go into gallery mode. So everybody's on the screen. And I think everybody can unmute. And if you got stuff to say, we'll just do it until it's either total chaos or no one wants to talk anymore. Because normally, like I say, these go on for 4 or 5 hours. So people are used to sitting in their chairs for at least another 3 hours. And whatever anybody's got to say, I can't. It's almost like we've all said exactly the same thing. And it's just that Al is one of the greatest people we've ever known and one of the greatest engineers we've ever known. And I think the quote about Al having a hit in every decade is actually really important because there are a lot of engineers who did amazing work in portions of their careers and then they're still around and they're still making records, or the beginning of their careers, not a whole lot happened and then they really hit their stride or whatever. Al was making records before anybody on this screen was born, probably, kind of, maybe, but certainly most of us. Hit records, huge records that you could listen to now and still be astounded by. And he did the exact same thing last year. And it's incredible without missing a year in between.
Nothing I can do.
Just incredible.
The only word I haven't heard about Al, not to interrupt, and I apologize, is that great example of authenticity, is that there could only ever be one Al Schmitt. He was the epitome of authenticity.
Yeah, no question.
Really.
And I basically.
You basically muted yourself.
Al's muting me.
He found the button. If Al's gonna haunt anybody, it's gonna be Frank.
Oh, I've got one. When we were having a meeting in New York of the steering committee, I guess it was, and I was booking an Italian restaurant for the dinner after the meeting, and Al was like really worried that I didn't know enough about Italian food. Yeah, he was reassured at the restaurant, but it was like, you're booking an Italian restaurant? Are you sure you know what you're doing?
Oh yeah, watching him and Phil go back and forth, those were some great moments. There's one part where we're all together and Phil looks around the room and says, look, between all us here, we probably have 250 years of music recording experience. And he points at Al and says, most of it is sitting in that chair.
I remember that.
Yeah,
well, the Italian restaurants were Paponis. They were Marinos. There were Martinis. There was what was it? Villa Capri. There was there was, when we did the Academy Awards, we'd always have Marinos cater it, and even in New York, he would say, well, you're going to New York, you gotta go to Sistina. You gotta go to Sistina. And the night I went, I was finishing a movie, and Tommy La Puma is in the restaurant with Elvis Costello and Diana Krall, but yeah, I mean, he it was one of the many pleasures of his life,
We probably called them and told them to go there.
I don't think so. But anyway.
Paula got to see a lot of the Al and Phil show.
Oh, well, Phil, I was in England and Al, actually, I was working with Rod Temperton and in England, and Al called me and to tell me that Phil had passed, because I'd worked with Phil a lot, from Quincy Jones to the Barbra Streisand Star Is Born, and he said to me, I mean, the idea that he would think of me at that point, he said, because he said, I know how much he meant to you, it was just an example of what he his humanity. He wanted me to know.
And I think it's
as soon as possible. So.
It's easy to think that because he was in the studio all the time, that was it, that was the only thing he cared about. But I don't know that I ever had a conversation about making records outside the studio. I had a dinner at his house, and all we talked about was the incredibly fat, sick, one-eyed cat that we had adopted. He collected art. He knew an Italian restaurant in every single city on the planet, basically.
Yeah.
He loved to eat. He loved to talk. He loved to be with people. And his stories about all the amazing artists he would work with were about them as people and the dinners they went to and the stories that happened. It was never, boy, when I made that record, wasn't I awesome? Nothing to do with that at all.
Yeah.
Well,
One Oscar show we were doing, and that was the year that Queen was nominated, and they had all these dancers do this. There was like a little segment, and Al walks in with just at the moment where we're looking at the video where they're saying the Queen. Al walks in with Queen Latifah, and I went and I said, Your Majesty, and she came over and gave me a big hug. There was all these kind of things that were just spontaneous and beautiful. I was like, it was pretty amazing, I think.
I got a letter that from Neil Young that I should probably read. It's very short. But he couldn't be here. He wanted to be here because they were good buddies. One of our old friends, a record maker for the ages, is no longer with us. His masterful music lives on. The great Al Schmitt has passed away. Al was a good friend for many, many years, and his gift for recording was recognized around the world. Al taught us so much, and I am so happy that just a couple days ago, I got a chance to tell him again how great his influence is and how much I loved what he did for my music. From On the Beach to Storytone to Children of Destiny, Al was right there with me. Thanks so much, Al, for your kindness, your smile, your ties, and your great talent. You make us all better. Love and peace, Neil. So there.
I kind of feel like we ought to leave it there. I don't know what there is to add. So hopefully everybody had time to queue up Unforgettable. I'm going to switch the stream to a picture of Al that Paola took that I think sums him up. He's smiling and he's smoking a cigar and wearing a tie. I don't know what else you need to know. So thank you so much for being here, everybody. Thanks everybody who was watching, and this will not be the last tribute to Al Schmitt, but hopefully this helps everybody start to get through it.
Thank you,
Thanks,
Andrew.
Andrew.
Thank you.
Well done.
Andrew.
Well done.
Thanks,
Everybody.
Love everybody.
Catch.
Thank you.